All right, so get this. We're diving into this conversation between Joe Rogan and JD Vance.
Okay.
And this was recorded just days before the 2024 election.
Wow.
The one where Vance is running as VP.
Oh, wow. Talk about pressure.
Yeah, every word he says, you're just like, oh my gosh, this guy could be the president.
And they get into some pretty heavy stuff.
Yeah, like what?
Like Trump, wokeness, big pharma, you name it.
Okay.
All the hot button topics.
All right, I'm ready.
So where do they even begin?
Yeah, where do they start?
Well, Vance starts by talking about getting the VP nomination.
Oh, wow.
He's at home. His 7-year-old son's running around.
Oh, jeez.
Totally oblivious.
Oh, that's funny.
That Dan's life is about to change forever.
Yeah, what a strange juxtaposition, right?
I know.
Like 1 minute you're just a dad.
Yeah.
And the next minute you're like,
potentially.
yeah.
A heartbeat away from presidency.
How do you even process something like that?
No. With all the, normal life stuff going on.
Right.
It's got to be surreal.
Totally. And speaking of processing things,
Yeah.
they talk about how most presidents seem to age so dramatically in office.
Oh, yeah?
But Trump somehow didn't.
Yeah, it's true. He kind of looks the same.
I know. Vance was actually surprised
Really?
by how healthy and energetic Trump looked in person.
That's interesting.
It is interesting.
Oh, yeah, the presidency's got to be stressful.
Oh, yeah.
But I guess maybe Trump's unconventional approach and his thick skin, maybe that helped him deal with it better.
Maybe so. But things take a darker turn when they start talking about the attempted assassination of Trump.
Oh, God.
Vance calls it a genuine miracle that Trump survived.
Really?
All thanks to this last-second head turn that caused the bullet to graze his ear.
Wow, that's scary.
Yeah.
So how did this even happen? Did they catch the guy?
Yeah, they get into the details about how the shooter got so close, how these warnings were seemingly ignored, and how some of the official explanations just don't add up.
Wow. So there are a lot of unanswered questions.
Yeah, Vance even suggests that if he's elected, he'll push for a more thorough investigation.
That makes sense.
Yeah, because there's definitely something fishy going on there.
Yeah, you don't just brush something like that under the rug.
Right.
So what else did they talk about?
Well, they shift gears a bit and get into a topic that's been generating a lot of debate.
Oh, yeah. What's that?
Wokeness.
Oh, wokeness.
Yeah, but before we go any further,
Right.
I think it's important to clarify that they're not talking about advocating for equality or social justice in general.
Right.
What they're concerned about are what they see as extreme positions within certain social movements,
Gotcha.
particularly when it comes to transgender issues.
Okay.
So they're not dismissing the entire LGBTQ plus community.
Right.
They're just raising questions about what they perceive as rigid ideologies that don't allow for open discussion or dissenting opinions.
Okay, so what kind of things are they talking about specifically?
Well, Vance mentions a quote he saw that referred to gay rights as a religious.
Uh-huh.
He doesn't finish the quote.
Right.
You get the sense that he's suggesting that certain aspects of these movements are being treated with the same kind of unquestioning faith as religious doctrines.
I see.
And to illustrate this point, he talks about a friend of his,
a
go man, who actually feels alienated by the current direction of the movement.
Oh, wow.
This friend just wants to be left the hell alone,
Huh.
which I think resonates with a lot of people, regardless of their political views.
I could see that.
It raises the question, when does advocating for rights cross the line into pushing an ideology that some members of that very group feel uncomfortable with?
Yeah, that's a great question.
Right. And this leads them to another area where they see this trend playing out.
Okay.
The influence of big pharma.
Oh,
They lament how the left, which was traditionally critical of profit-driven healthcare, seems to have gone quiet on that front.
Interesting.
Instead, they see a growing acceptance of big pharma's agenda, and that worries them.
Okay. I can see why that would be concerning.
Yeah.
So how does this tie into the whole wokeness thing?
Well, they see it as part of this larger trend of silencing dissent and shutting down debate.
Yes.
They argue that pharmaceutical companies are now using their power and influence to shape the narrative around certain health issues.
In what way?
Well, Vance is particularly concerned about the way pharmaceutical companies might be influencing the way we diagnose and treat certain conditions.
Like what, for example?
He brings up child dysphoria.
Okay.
And he argues that pharmaceutical companies have a financial incentive to push for its inclusion in psychiatric manuals, potentially leading to the medicalization of what might just be a complex social or emotional issue.
So they're basically saying that Big Pharma is profiting off of kids' struggles.
That's essentially what they're suggesting.
Wow. That's a pretty heavy accusation.
It is. And he doesn't just stop there.
Oh, no?
He shares a story secondhand about a friend who worked for a pharmaceutical lobbying organization. Apparently, this organization was using Native American tribes as a shield against opioid lawsuits.
How does that even work?
The idea is they were offering these tribes small royalty streams in exchange for using their tribal sovereignty as a legal defense.
So they're basically exploiting these tribes.
That's the implication.
To protect themselves from lawsuits.
Exactly. Now, it's important to note that we haven't been able to verify this story independently.
Right, of course.
But it certainly highlights the kind of questionable tactics that Vance and Rogan are worried about.
Yeah, it definitely raises some red flags.
It does. And it makes you wonder, who's really benefiting from these practices?
Right.
Is it patients, or is it the corporations and lobbyists who are pulling the strings?
Yeah, that's the big question, isn't it?
It is. And then there's pharmaceutical advertising.
Oh, yeah, that's another big one.
Which they really go off on.
They hate that.
They do. Why is it even allowed in the U.S., they ask?
Yeah, it's weird that we're one of the only countries that allows that.
I know. They argue that it creates a conflict of interest. For media outlets who rely on those advertising dollars.
Makes sense.
How can you critically report on an industry that's essentially paying your bills?
It's tough to bite the hand that feeds you.
Right. And they even suggest that this financial dependence might be why we didn't see more critical coverage of potential vaccine side effects.
Wow, that's a bold claim.
It is. It's a pretty provocative claim.
Yeah.
But it definitely makes you think about the influence money has on the information we receive.
Absolutely.
And they don't stop there.
Oh, boy.
They go on to talk about the environment, too.
Okay, let's hear it.
But we'll have to save that for part 2.
All right. I can't wait.
Stay tuned.
I will. So JD Vance and Joe Rogan didn't hold back in part 1.
Not at all.
They really got into some controversial stuff.
Yeah, and in this part, they zero in on the environment.
Okay.
And some interesting ideas about social movements.
All right, I'm all ears.
So first up, their critique of the environmental movement.
Okay.
And their focus on the carbon footprint.
Yeah, what about it?
They argue that it's led to a neglect of other environmental problems like the East Palestine disaster.
Oh, right, the train derailment.
Yeah, exactly.
So are they saying we shouldn't worry about carbon emissions?
No, not exactly.
Okay.
Their point is that this singular focus might actually be counterproductive.
In what way?
Well, while reducing emissions is important, becoming fixated on this one metric could blind us to other environmental threats.
Okay, I see what they're saying.
Like that chemical spill, which had a real and immediate impact on that community.
And they're saying the environmental movement didn't really care.
Yeah. Vance was pretty frustrated by the lack of support for studying the long-term health effects.
It's almost like they're so worried about the forest they're missing the trees.
That's a great way to put it.
So they're not denying climate change.
Right.
They're just questioning the approach.
Exactly. It's like they're advocating for a broader perspective.
Okay.
One that acknowledges the complexity of environmental issues.
So not just reducing everything to carbon emissions.
Right. And it makes you wonder, did this focus on the carbon footprint actually distract from other pressing problems?
It's a good question.
Did it create a hierarchy of concern?
Where some issues are seen as more important than others.
Exactly. I think that's something worth thinking about.
It is. Now, the other thing that stood out to me was their comparison between radical trans stuff and religious faith.
Oh, yeah. That was a bold statement.
It was, but I think what they were getting at is this idea that certain political stances are being treated with the same level of unquestioning faith as religious doctrines.
Like you're not allowed to question them.
Right. You're just supposed to accept them as truth.
And if you don't, you're a heretic.
Exactly. And Vance even mentioned this quote he saw online.
Oh, yeah.
Something about gay rights as a religious.
He didn't finish it, but...
Right, but it definitely implies that some elements of the movement have become almost dogmatic.
And remember that story about his gay friend?
Yes.
Yeah.
Who felt totally alienated.
Yeah, he just wanted to be left alone.
Exactly. And I think a lot of people feel that way.
Yeah, regardless of their political views.
Right. It's like, when does advocating for rights turn into pushing an ideology?
That makes people uncomfortable.
Right. And that's a problem.
It is. It shuts down dialogue.
Yeah, and prevents us from having those difficult conversations.
That we need to have.
Exactly. And this ties back to their point about Big Pharma, right? The silencing of dissent.
Yeah, it's like a larger trend.
Where certain viewpoints are deemed unacceptable.
And you're not allowed to challenge them.
It's like a new kind of thought police.
Right. And that's pretty scary.
It is.
Right.
Because it undermines our ability to have open and honest debates.
About important issues.
Which is essential for a healthy democracy.
Exactly. So it's not just about transgender issues or big pharma.
Right. It's a much bigger problem.
It's about this erosion of free speech and open dialogue.
Which is something we should all be concerned about.
Absolutely. All right. So we're back with JD Vance and Joe Rogan. And they're not done yet.
I figured.
They still have a lot to say about big pharma social media and this whole erosion of trust thing.
Let's hear it.
So Vance really digs into big pharma and how they influence the healthcare system.
Right.
And this over-medicalization of certain conditions.
Yeah, he touched on that earlier.
Yeah, and he keeps coming back to it.
Okay.
And you can really hear the frustration in his voice.
When he talks about child dysphoria and those lobbying efforts to get it in the psychiatric manuals, he argues that this could lead to kids getting treatments that they don't really need.
And that's where big pharma comes in.
Exactly. They profit from these diagnoses and treatments.
It's a tough issue.
It is. And then there's that story he told about his friend.
Oh, yeah, the one who worked for the pharmaceutical lobbying organization.
Yeah, the one that used Native American tribes.
To avoid lawsuits.
Exactly.
It's a crazy story.
It is. Even if it's not true.
Right.
It really makes you think.
About how far these companies will go.
To protect their profit.
Yeah, and who gets hurt in the process.
Exactly. And speaking of protecting profits. What about those pharmaceutical ads?
Oh, man, they really went off on that.
I know. I can't believe those are still allowed.
It's insane. They argue that it creates this conflict of interest.
For the media.
Exactly. Like, how can you be objective?
When you're getting paid by these companies.
No, right. And they suggest that this is why.
We didn't hear more about vaccine side effects.
Exactly. They're basically saying that
the media is in Big Pharma's pocket.
That's what it sounds like. And then they move on to social media.
Oh, boy, here we go.
Yeah, and they're furious about Zuckerberg admitting
that the FBI told Facebook to suppress the Hunter Biden story.
Yeah, they see it as this blatant attempt
to control the narrative
and manipulate public opinion.
Yeah, and what's worse,
no one was held accountable.
Exactly. It's like there's a different set of rules.
For the elites.
And this leads to a bigger problem.
The erosion of trust.
In our institutions.
Yeah, people are losing faith.
In the government, the media, even science.
And that's a dangerous thing.
It is. Because it undermines our democracy.
Exactly. When people don't trust the system.
It's hard to make it work.
And that's what Vance and Rogan are getting at.
They're sounding the alarm.
Yeah, they're saying that something is fundamentally broken.
And we need to fix it.
But it's not going to be easy.
Nope.
It's a complex problem.
With no easy solutions.
But at least they're starting a conversation.
Yeah, that's the first step.
Getting people to think critically about these issues.
And to question the narratives that we're being fed.
Exactly. We need to be informed citizens.
And hold our leaders accountable.
And demand transparency.
And engage in respectful debate.
About the challenges facing our country.
That's how we make progress.
Exactly. So yeah, this deep dive.
It's been a wild ride.
It has. But it's given us a lot to think about.
It has. And hopefully it's inspired you
to do your own research.
And engage in these important conversations.
Because the future of our democracy
depends on it.
So thanks for joining us.
And keep thinking critically.